paranoia. Welcome to the Ironsysadmin Podcast. Good evening, folks, and welcome to episode 64 of the Ironsysadmin Podcast. I'm your host, Nate, and I'm joined tonight by Jason.
That's me.
That's you.
I have bad news.
I
apologize to all of the people out there. I think I broke Twitter.
Did you break Twitter?
Like just now. It doesn't work.
Well, look, somebody broke Twitter earlier today, and there's a good chance that it just happened again.
All I wanted to do was tell the world that Ironsysadmin was live and the Twitters broke. So sorry about that.
That was just too much to ask. Let me see what happens.
Something is technically wrong.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened earlier today.
They did thank me for noticing, though. So.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, make sure you tell them that you're welcome.
Yeah, I can't because I can't tweet at them. It's broke. I don't know what I'm gonna do now.
Wow, something is technically wrong.
I don't. What do I do during a podcast when I can't tweet?
I don't know. I really don't know what to tell you. I can say that somebody at Twitter is having a bad day.
Okay, well,
At any rate, good evening, folks. Yeah, just, this afternoon, like 2-3 o'clock, I noticed the same problem where Twitter was throwing that very uninformative message that something is horribly wrong, and it turned out that it was a lot of people affected. I haven't seen much about it in the news yet, though, so maybe no one's watching Twitter anymore. That can't be the case.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. I had no idea that there was an issue this afternoon.
That's because you're so busy with that new job of yours.
Yeah, I was heads down learning something for once.
That's weird.
Yeah, I was on Twitter earlier, though, so I don't know.
Well, it was working for most of the day. It was like,
Gremlins.
I don't know, 45 minutes or so where it wasn't working.
Somebody left their Mogwai up overnight and fed it.
That's it. Totally it. Okay, so
All right.
I guess we'll just get this show going then, without Twitter. I mean, that is unfortunate. How will we tell the world? I don't know. Anyway, I did tweet. I guess before it broke. Maybe I'm the one breaking it.
Maybe.
Because
Maybe.
I was fiddling with Twitter when it broke last time. Now I tweeted and it broke again. So maybe it's me.
Yeah, so
Totally
Down
me.
Detector seems to be starting to spike reports again that it's broke.
Nice. It's gonna be so not to delay the show much more, but basically earlier today I was tinkering with a new social app to tweet about, for Ironsysadmin and for another project that I'm part of, to send posts to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Not Instagram for Ironsysadmin, but for my other project. And that's when Twitter broke. And the thing that I did last on Twitter was use that same app to share that the show was going to go live. So it would be really funny if this app is somehow abusing poor Twitter. It's got to be coincidence, though. I hope it's coincidence.
Well, you look, if it's not and you're causing it, then we'll just catch it here live when they come kick your door in.
Yeah, right, exactly. What are you doing to Twitter? Anyway. All right, so some interesting news broke this week. This particular article is from ZDNet. The IBM Red Hat acquisition. Did I say that the right way? IBM's buying Red Hat. We talked about this months ago when it first broke on this show. Well, it's closed. IBM has closed the $34 billion Red Hat acquisition, and now it's time to deliver, according to the article. The article is more or less just a placeholder because there's a billion articles about this. There's a billion people speculating things. I tried to get information that was coming from reliable sources. One of the links that I included in the show notes is an actual video of the IBM CEO, and Jim Whitehurst. I, for the life of me, cannot remember the IBM CEO's name. She's a very nice lady.
Jenny Ramadi.
That's it. So it's an interesting watch. It's a relatively long video, but it's linked in the show notes. It's basically the two of them talking about the direction that things are going and what is expected to happen to Red Hat, and the general, at least the message they're trying to send is that Red Hat will remain independent. They're not going to be like under the thumb of IBM, and the goal of the whole thing is so that IBM and Red Hat can work together to build better hybrid cloud platforms. There was some speculation early on that this was going to be like, IBM wants Red Hat to fuel their own cloud offering because IBM does have a cloud offering. But that is not the message that they're sending. They're basically saying, yeah, it'd be great, to draw people into IBM's cloud, but the whole goal here is to get IBM and Red Hat involved in the global cloud market. And that is basically hybrid cloud. Red Hat's thing for the past several years has been, any app, anywhere, right? So if you build your app to run on Red Hat's platforms, you can run it in any cloud that you want to. And that's the same message that they sent during this little interview that I saw. So it sounds cool. It sounds like Red Hat is about to get an influx of global scale, and that can only be good, I think, for Red Hat, as long as they're able to keep their autonomy like everyone's saying they're going to be able to. So.
Yeah, I mean, so IBM bought a security company. Can't remember the name of it. Something Force something, whatever. Anyway, our buddy works for them.
You mean the one Mog works for?
Yeah, the one
Sorry,
Mog works for.
I didn't want to say that out loud if you were trying to make that all like subversive, but I think he said that on the show when he was on.
Yeah. So, but my point.
It's like X-Force Red or something they're called. Yeah.
X-Force Red.
Yeah.
So they bought X-Force Red, and X-Force Red has stayed largely autonomous at this point. So I mean, it's possible. IBM is not the monolith of nonsense that it was years ago, where it acquired things, chewed it up, and spit it out in the same exact gray box that everything else IBM had.
Yeah, they talked pretty extensively about this when I was at Summit as well.
Blue box.
They talked pretty extensively about this when I was at Red Hat Summit as well. And Jim and Ginny, you said her name was, were on stage having a very similar discussion as to what is linked in the article or in the show notes. I could probably look up that keynote and add it to the show notes if I can find it, if I remember to do that by the end of the show. But it was a pretty good chat. Basically, they sent the same message then. So at the very least, they're being consistent with all this. So if it is a big lie, at least they have all their facts straight.
So I'm seeing a related article here. Apparently, Satya was at the summit as well.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, imagine that, right? Freaking. What is he, CEO or whatever of Microsoft?
CEO of Microsoft, yeah.
Yeah, he's like on stage at Red Hat Summit, and that was a pretty good message too.
With IBM and Red Hat, that's kind of insane.
I know, it's like what? So, yeah.
Cannot process.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like all of the infighting that we remember from back in the days, back in the 90s and early 2000s between these three, not so much Red Hat, but IBM, Microsoft, open source in general, which of course Red Hat was a big piece of. That's all kind of behind us now. So, I mean, that's kind of cool, right?
Yeah, no, I am looking forward to RHEL 8.0 for AS400.
That would be hilarious. RHEL on the AS400. Okay, so yeah, Red Hat, IBM, hopefully not a bad thing.
Hopefully.
Moving on to an article from CNBC. So Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple will show up at a congressional antitrust hearing next week. And by next week, it means July 16th. Article's from July 9th, so only a couple days ago. But yeah, this I basically threw in here because it's an interesting talking point. Basically, if you haven't heard any of the news lately, there are folks in Washington, folks in the U.S. government, who are starting to think that tech giants like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple are becoming monopolies.
Yeah.
Because they're all...
If you haven't heard this news, can I come join you under whatever rock you're under?
Yeah, right. So, I mean, personally, as I've mentioned before, I don't listen to a whole lot of news. I basically have a collection of news shorts that play on my Google Home device in the morning, and that's about it. I don't really watch the news much else, except when I'm doing things like preparing for this show. And even I heard about it. So if I heard about it and I kind of purposely avoid news, you know.
So it's interesting.
I have a visitor behind me. Hang on a second.
Oh, well, I'm going to continue talking then.
You can take your laptop if you want.
I think that this is interesting because the only other antitrust scenario I'm aware of is that I guess maybe during my lifetime or there was Microsoft. So Microsoft sort of was under the antitrust gun for a little while in the browser wars, and then prior to that, it was the baby bells with AT&T and breaking all that up into the big phone companies that are out there now, and that's becoming arguably an issue again as well as they start trying to pull themselves back together. So you have things like the T-Mobile Sprint merger that are currently being sort of reviewed by the DOJ, and I'm not sure. I don't know if they've actually ruled on the Sprint T-Mobile merger yet. I remember hearing something about it, but anyway, so they're trying to kind of put the bells back together there. But then you have these on the tech side. Phones are on the tech side, but this is more like pure tech, where you have Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple. And the interesting thing that I find about these guys is that they're going after them for antitrust, but in a lot of cases, they're so spread out on what they do that in some cases I'm not sure that innovation necessarily is something that could happen outside of that, if that makes sense, right? So Google sort of like owns the search domain right now, and I don't know how you break that up. Although I guess they did with the phone company, so they could probably do it with this. But...
That is a tough one. Search is sort of monolithic, though, don't you think?
Well, yeah, that's the thing.
Like how do you?
A weird one.
So, like in the I don't know all the details about when they broke up Bell, or broke up AT&T. Was it? Yeah, it was Bell. Was it Bell Telephone?
Yeah, Bell Atlantic.
Yeah, Bell Atlantic. I don't know all the details of when they broke up Bell Atlantic, but I'd imagine that the easiest way to do that would be to isolate it by region or something, or isolate it by service or something. Right. Search is a service, period, by itself. But the Googles have a ton of other services that, when you lump them all together, look sort of like a monopoly, right? So
they do, and advertising is really the thing they make the money off.
Yeah,
but I mean, search itself is sort of a very special one where you can't really necessarily regionalize it because I mean it uses all of the data together. So how do you do that? The advertising, maybe you could break up some of that.
Well, you could peel those things off is the point.
Yeah, and the whole alphabet setup that they have, where they've have that parent company and they sort of split into little companies underneath it. Honestly, when that happened, that was sort of, at least I thought that was kind of a move to prevent anything antitrust from coming through. Because they can point to that and say, look, they're different companies under one umbrella.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing when I said that about how you could peel those off. But you're right. They did. I mean, there are a number of pieces beneath Alphabet which search is one of, and advertising is one of, and Android is one of, and mobile is one of, and all these other services. Like YouTube, I don't know, is technically a Google property. It's like an Alphabet property, I would think, right? I don't know. I don't.
Google is an Alphabet property, so.
That's what I mean. Google is an Alphabet property.
Right.
So I guess, would that mean Alphabet is the monopoly? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know how this works. I know nothing about it.
You have Google that has I don't know how many hundreds of products.
Right.
You have Amazon that has, you got AWS, you've got the Amazon store, and you've got like video and photos and music, and maybe a handful of other smaller services that nobody uses. So they're a little bit different. And then you have things like, Apple does all sorts of stuff. They're kind of, I would make them akin to like Microsoft. And then you have Facebook. Facebook is a I definitely think there's and I'm obviously biased against Facebook, but I definitely think there's a monopoly there if you think about it, just by the fact that 2/3 of the world's population is on that platform.
Yeah, but so the thing
that one I think is the easiest one to break up.
How so?
You could definitely regionalize that one, and if you regionalized it and federated it, you could very easily have a multiple companies running and sort of competing.
So
competing and sort of have their own areas, and they don't all have to be under one umbrella.
The thing is, Facebook is in itself a service, an internet service, yes. A global service.
Right.
And regionalizing it kind of defeats the purpose.
Maybe. How many, I'm not on Facebook, but how many Facebook friends do you have outside the U.S.?
Well, none, because I don't speak any languages outside of English.
Oh, okay. and like, there are definitely people that have Facebook friends across the world.
Yeah, yeah.
What I'm saying is, like, Diaspora was a sort of federated style.
And there's a couple solutions that are like that.
Right. If they broke Facebook up and they were forced to do that, you could still have conversations and friends all over the world. You just don't. It's on multiple platforms, and each platform would be responsible for their own content, their own their own rules and regulations for that content, etc.
The thing that gets me, so the difference between the situation that Bell was in all those years ago and the situation that Facebook is in now is that Facebook, while you could argue is a almost requirement anymore, it's not a utility.
No, it's not. But when you have 2/3 of the world on your platform, and then you basically give the middle finger to everybody and say, "Hey, I'm going to create my own money," at that point, it's no longer. It's like the antitrust when it comes to Facebook. To me, looking at it, is not so much. We want to break this up because they're a monopoly. I think this one is more personal. I think this is more of a. We need to do something before Facebook becomes its own country and its own government. And you can argue that they've already done that. Yeah,
I mean that could be a valid concern, right? Because if they're going to come up with their own currency, which has been spoken about lately. Maybe you mentioned that while I was busy dealing with the child who came into the room, but no. But yeah, they're talking about their own cryptocurrency, which talk about what sounds like a terrible idea. At least from a privacy perspective, from a user's perspective.
You misunderstand. Facebook is all about privacy now. Did you not get the memo?
Yeah, right. They're all about privacy. I believe that.
Zuck came out with this big thing about how Facebook is all about privacy.
Yeah, I don't believe it.
They're gonna privacy all
the
thing.
Do you believe it?
Well, he said it, and I think I saw it on TV once, so yeah.
Oh, I mean, if it was on TV...
It's on the internet.
It's on the internet, yeah.
So, the other hand, the world is becoming more, well, the world has become more and continues to be more global.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at it at that lens, then a global system like Facebook actually makes sense, because it allows for for potentially for a global platform. Um, so
I
looking
still,
at it from the other lens, I think there actually is benefit to having. I mean, I think there's definitely things wrong with Facebook, but I don't touch it because of the privacy pieces. But I think overall it could potentially be a better thing and good for the world at large.
from a communication standpoint, sure, but I feel like breaking that up lessens it. Like it cheapens it a little bit. Maybe not cheapens it. It I guess if it's done well, it doesn't have to. But the whole point of breaking it up would be to take ownership out of one person's hands, take control out of one person's hands, right? That's the whole reason for breaking up a monopoly, because that particular entity has too much control over a market or over a thing.
Right. And
right?
And one thing that we're overlooking here is that we're talking global. Um, this is the monopoly piece of it is a U.S. piece.
Yeah.
So the U.S. can break up the monopoly in the U.S., but they can't force their hand outside of that. So, in theory, Facebook could remain global except for the U.S., where it has there's 6 Facebook companies because that's what it got broken up into. Because if you think about when Bell Atlantic got broken up, those are all U.S. companies. It just got broken into multiple U.S. companies. So I the globalization piece of it isn't. It should be a consideration, but I don't think there's any enforcement that the U.S. could do on that without buy-in from other countries.
The thing I'm not sure about moving away from Facebook is how like Apple plays into this. Apple's big, and yeah, they make a lot of devices, but there's certainly competition.
I don't disagree. I was trying to stray away from the Apple because I don't want to be called the Apple fanboy.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I'm just like looking at it from a fair perspective, right? I don't have to have an iPhone. I don't have to have an Apple MacBook. I don't have to have an iPad. Right. I don't have to have an Apple Watch. There are competitive solutions to all of those things, and it's
outside of the Apple phone arena. MacBooks aren't. I mean, Microsoft dominates in that, by a large margin.
Yeah. So from a hardware perspective, you've got Dell, you've got Lenovo, you've got HP, you've got, I don't know, is Gateway still around? From a phone perspective, you've got Android. I mean, you've got BlackBerry's gone now, isn't it? Or are they still around?
No, they sort of resurrected. At least last I heard, they resurrected, but they were running Android. So phone OS, the only thing you have is iOS.
Yeah, Windows is no more, right?
Right.
Windows Phone is. Windows Phone.
Themselves, but yeah.
Yeah.
You've got iOS, you've got Android, and Huawei is making their own thing.
Oh, really? Because of the tariff problem, or because of the blacklist thing?
Yeah, well, they're not blacklisted anymore, so maybe that'll change. But that was supposedly a thing.
Oh, interesting. So, yeah, I mean, I don't see where Apple fits in here. Yeah, they're a tech giant, but I can't see them being seen as a monopoly. That doesn't make sense to me.
I'm not sure where that one comes in.
Yeah. I mean, it's great if they want to show up and make a case and help support, or I don't know, maybe they're not there to support. Maybe they're like, oh yeah, those Google people, they're terrible. You got to break them up.
Maybe. So there's aspects that I think that there needs to be more competition, and there's aspects that I think that, for better or for worse, like global is okay, or, in the case of like search, like it sort of makes sense.
Yeah, but again, like how do you break up search?
I don't know. No, you do it like China does. You can only search things in China.
Yeah, I think we've hit on an interesting point with the sort of internet, I don't know, citizenship, and Facebook being a facilitator for that, right? Like the internet community is basically Facebook.
I mean, I don't know that I'd 100% agree with that, but I mean, you're not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's still optional. I think it'd be a lot cooler if it was like Facebook were a protocol, or something like Facebook were a protocol.
Right. So like, I think the thing that killed Bell Atlantic was communications was needed, and Bell was phones. They were the only.
Yeah.
They were literally the only way to communicate.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you're going to go down that road, can somebody please come in and do something about the horrible service that I have from my local providers here? I can have a slow-ass DSL line or a not quite as slow but still crappy cable modem. I'd like some more. Like, competition would be great. Those are more interesting to me than, like, look, if people want to like throw all their data at Facebook and Facebook wants to abuse the hell out of it, that's their problem. My problem with Facebook is when they're using data that they're mining and I haven't given to them, right? Like this whole shadow profile thing.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, absolutely. You know, like that's
Facebook tracks me even though I don't have a Facebook account.
Well, I mean, it's like the credit score debate. Did you ever give the credit union or the credit bureaus permission to keep track of your financial prowess? No.
Right.
It's same deal, right? It's just that this is in a digital world, and it's your life, not just your finances.
Right.
So, yeah. Yeah, but, yeah, I think it'd be cool if there were a social network that people could actually participate in that was decentralized. And I don't know if like... I mean, go ahead.
At the same time, I think, like, if it was decentralized, Facebook is kind of a horrible, rotten gutter as it is. If you decentralize, how much worse could it get? I'm not sure I want to know the answer to that question.
Well, that's what I mean, right? So, you know, the backbone of a social network could be some kind of a protocol, and then, you know, nodes could check into it. But then you run into the exact same problem that things like Diaspora and there were other, excuse me, I should say there are other protocols or other services that do decentralized social networks.
Yeah, you're talking like Mastodon.
Well, yeah, but there was another one. I can't remember the name of it. It was an open source project that you could get a client. There were a bunch of open source clients you could get. I can't remember the name of the dang protocol. But anyway, it was
Facebook style or Twitter style.
It was neither. It was
Matrix.
No.
Like IRC type stuff.
Like it. I don't know.
Doesn't matter. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, the point is the bar to entry is too high, right? So with Diaspora, I stood up a pod, and even with the skill level that I have, it was a pain in the butt. Like, there's no way you could expect a general, like, average everyday user who just wants to participate in this social network to stand up their own pod. You'd have to have people like me and like you, people who are skilled, set up their pods, and then at that point, all you've done is taken the problem and spread it out across a bunch of amateurs.
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah, I mean, there's definitely things that need to be handled. Like, if a pod goes down, what happens to the data? You know, if you decide you don't want to run a pod anymore.
Yeah.
So, like, there's distributed systems issues.
But if you were to take somebody like Facebook and say, sorry, Facebook, you're too big, we need to split you into a dozen different smaller corporations, and all those smaller corporations stand up their own little Facebooks, right?
Right.
And then they talk to each other. The little Facebooks can all communicate with each other. Then you still have the service level that Facebook provides, but you have it a little less centralized, which could be a good thing.
Maybe. You know, but then you get into, again, this, you know, if you take the Diaspora example and everybody starts running their own pods, it's the onus of whoever's running the pod to do any sort of filtering, banning, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And then if you split up Facebook, you've got a dozen different Facebook entities that are doing things different ways.
Sure.
Um,
I think that's a good thing.
Maybe that might be okay.
I think that's a good thing, right? And if it's not, so you use the concept of regionalizing them. I wouldn't say regionalize them so that there's a Northeast U.S. Facebook that everybody in the Northeast U.S. has to use. It's more like there's a dozen different little Facebook pods or whatever you want to call them, and you get to pick whichever one you want based on feature set, based on filtering, based on content, based on are your friends there? Maybe that has some I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but I think
it would definitely be interesting to see what the competition would be. Like, what are they going to compete on? So
right.
Facebook is free today, right? So what
free?
What do you compete on?
If you want to call it free.
Average person, as far as they're concerned,
it's
doesn't
free.
Cost them anything to go.
No, yeah, it costs you your privacy.
Right, but if that's the case, then you have 12 different Facebooks, and you have ones that are like, yep, we're going to sell your data to everybody, and nobody wants to go there. And then you've got the one that's real tight and says like, we're gonna show shadow figures of you, and nobody's gonna know who you are.
Right.
And how do they make money? How do they how do these things survive?
Yeah, I don't know.
So I don't know.
That's
like a good experiment.
That's another problem with the diaspora model, is that it doesn't make money. By design.
The diaspora model wasn't intended to make money. It was intended for
right. But if it doesn't make money, what's the motivation to run it? Passion?
I'm a nerd and I want to run it.
Right, passion. That's it.
Right.
That only gets you so far.
I don't disagree.
So, anyway, we've talked about this enough, I think. Maybe we could have a whole episode about how we want to decentralize Facebook, but
I think we just did.
I think we did. All right.
Speaking of monopolies.
Yes, moving on. This is an article from CNN. I skimmed this, I have to admit, but I kind of understand what's going on here. Android apps are harvesting your data even after you tell them not to, says this study. And I didn't read too much about who ran the study or whatever, because I'm terrible at this, guys. But basically, the gist of the article is that even if you have... So you install an Android app. One of the cool things I always thought about Android when I was running Android was that when you installed an app, you got to selectively turn on and off the various permissions. iPhone has caught up with that now. And I thought that was great, right? So I get Facebook on my phone, and I don't want it to know my location. But I do want it to know, I don't know, just pick something, my contacts, whatever. I would never give Facebook permission to my contacts, but for the sake of argument, I would turn off location, I would turn on contacts, and I would feel safe knowing that Facebook knows who I interact with, but they don't know where I am. Well,
but little do you know.
Little do I know.
Background, and we don't know. I don't know specifically if Facebook is doing this. So
yeah. Oh no, that's just an example.
You can go to hell at this point.
Yeah.
So, App X, which you've told, yes, you can know my contacts, but you can't know my location, has code in it that then asks other applications or gets information off of your SD card or monitors traffic or does any of a dozen other things to figure out your location anyway.
Yeah.
So in the end, it has your location.
Yep.
Even if you told it you can't have that.
Yeah, so I mean the bottom line is if you have a device in your pocket that's able to track you and it stores that data anywhere, and you have an app on your phone who has access to, say, I don't know, the file system on your device, it can probably get your location data anyway. Which is kind of a problem.
Right. And it like, again, it's doing it it clearly these apps are doing it in an arguably immoral, unethical way.
But a thing that they have permission to do. Like a thing that they have
that's a cop out.
Well, hold on. A thing that they have no technical barrier against doing.
Correct.
That's what I meant by permission. They don't have my permission.
Okay. Right. So no, but like you're writing an app. You need the user's location. you say, "Oh, look, there's a location API."
Mm-hmm.
You say, "I need your location," and you find out that a lot of people are disabling the location, and you can't get it from the API.
Yeah.
Right. So now you have a choice as a
Oh
developer.
well.
You
I
can say, "Oh, well, people don't want it, so I guess that sucks."
guess I can't have their location. Oh well.
Or like these developers are literally deciding
Yeah.
through the customer,
Yeah.
I'm going to start mining everything I
Yeah.
can on that phone to figure out their location.
Yeah. They say something like, "Well, I know that Android stores this little text file that periodically pings itself and puts your location data in it. I'll just go read that."
Yeah. That is called unethical bullshit.
No, I agree. I totally agree.
That is, I'm sorry. If you're a developer and I find out you're doing that, your apps, every single one of your apps will never be on my machine again.
And if I find you, I'll kick you in the shins.
The polite way of putting it. I mean, that's ridiculous.
It is. It is. It is skeezy.
And I know they're going after Google on this one. I want to see the same study done on Apple. I want to know if that's possible with Apple.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is that it's not.
Right.
Because they sandbox it and isolate the file system as well. But I'm curious. Like,
well, I mean, Android is supposed to be sandboxing this stuff too.
Clearly, they're not.
Yeah. Just obviously.
Off of the SD card.
Obviously. Well, that's a permission. Like on there's a fundamental difference in the way that iPhone accesses your file system versus Android. Android's basically a Linux kernel. I mean, you know that.
Right.
Any app that has permission to the file system can read the whole file system.
Yeah. Okay.
Like it's locked down permissions wise the same way a Linux box would be. You're essentially like a user on a Linux box. But as you know, as a user on a Linux box, you can read a bunch of data. You just can't write to it, right? So that's probably the sort of thing that they're doing to get around this. And,
yeah.
And God help you if you've got your Android device rooted.
Well, look, if you root any device, Apple, Android, whatever,
game's over, guys.
you've chosen to disable certain protections.
Yeah.
So, but honestly, I want to see this same. I want to see the U.S. National. It was NSA. I want to see NSA Science and Security Program do this. Jesus Christ, this is a lot of people. U.S. National Security Agency Science of Security Program, Department of Homeland Security, and the National Science Foundation.
Wow.
Among others.
Among others. Of this thing. Among others that are too small to name, because when you're listed next to the NSA...
I want to see this done against Apple, and I want to know the results.
I agree, and maybe it has been. We should try to find out. I don't know how to find out, but...
Yeah, I don't either. Maybe it has been, and they went, "Oh, it doesn't happen."
Exactly, that's what I mean.
But that's news too. Like, they tell us.
Well, I mean, when you're CNN business, the lead is, "Oh, Android is horrible," not, "Hey,
I know.
Not Apple is happy."
So, if you're working for the NSA and you're listening, and I know you are,
right.
we're interested in this as well. So if you could put the report under a rock and blink the light 3 times, red, blue, green, at the third window from the left, so we know it's under the second rock, we'll go get the report. Is that obscure enough?
That's neat. Or, I don't know, considering that the data of the Android study is public,
just email us.
Just email it to us. Okay, I think we've beaten that horse to death. This one you added from Threat Post. You want to take it from there?
Oh, yeah. PGP's broke. Okay, moving on.
Okay.
No, PGP... Okay, so let's clear the air on this right away. PGP works fine. PGP continues to be PGP. It signs things. It secures things. Everything's wonderful. What's happening here is and I'm going to screw this up because this is one of those like black magic things. So OpenPGP uses something called SKS. It's a synchronizing key servers, and it is used. It's basically a think of it as a cloud of key servers.
Okay.
And it's used for distributing keys all over the place.
Now, is this a service related to the official PGP? Not.
I don't. It's Open PGP, so it's probably the GNU version.
I thought that was GPG.
Yeah.
GNU Privacy Guard.
I don't make the acronyms here.
Okay. Continue.
So I mean, they sort of work together, but anyway, the SKS servers have had a known vulnerability for, I think one of the developers said it was like known for like the last decade.
Oh, awesome.
But it's not it's not something that's trivial to deal with. And basically it's that the SKS servers have an upper limit of the number of requests that they can handle, I think is what it is. And maybe it's a certain type of request. And somebody has decided, I'm just going to DOS attack that. And that has basically killed the global SKS network. It's dead.
Interesting.
So, one of the developers...
the last week of June 2019, unknown actors deployed a certificate spamming attack against two high-profile contributors of the Open PGP community. Right. This attack exploited
Gilmore and Hansen, and basically the two of them have said, "Stop using SKS. You don't need it.
Yeah,
it just makes things easier."
So SKS
it works fine.
SKS is not like a public key server, right? This is some other protocol.
It is part. It's like a different. It's like a network of public key servers, I guess.
Okay.
And what's funny is that I've been having problems with SKS for a while now. With some of the stuff that I've been using, and I kind of just brushed it off as like, whatever, I'll just do it.
That's because it's been DDoSed.
Yeah, and I basically have just disabled using it and gone other directions.
Yeah,
it's been fine. I didn't know that there was a global problem.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So if you're using PGP or GPG or whatever, SKS is broke, and it is not something that is going to be fixed anytime soon. And if it is something that if you are a high risk user, you should stop using the key server network immediately.
I don't know that I ever actively or knowingly used it.
Yeah, I think by default, when you try to verify a key, it just automatically hits that network.
Oh, okay. Because the way I don't use GPG or PGP frequently anymore. But when I would basically tell it where the key server that we use, that we tell all of our users that use it to put their keys on. Right. And that's where it would verify keys against, as far as I'm aware of. Maybe I'm wrong, and it's using SKS this whole time, and I didn't know it.
Yeah. I think that was the default, to be honest.
Could be. Could be.
Yeah, I had been taught when I first learned it to specify the key servers.
Mm-hmm.
So I almost never use the defaults. I always specify what I'm doing.
Okay.
So maybe that's why I did. And the couple times that I used defaults, it always failed. So I just kind of figured it was.
Well, now it'll fail because it's being DDoSed.
So. Anyway, yeah, PGP be broke.
Makes you wonder what the motivation is to DDoS SKS. Just to prove a point, or is there like a real reason here?
It's hard to say. It could very well be that they are using that to exploit something completely different.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
So, in the realm of exploits and broken things, and actually quite pertinent to this particular podcast.
Yeah.
Did you hear Zoom was broken?
I did. Is it really only on Mac? The problem?
I heard secondhand, have not seen an article related to it, that the reason that Zoom decided to go ahead with putting the fix out that they did is because Windows was involved as well. But I have not seen an article related to it.
Mac
anyway,
isn't Mac's not enough?
For those that don't know,
yeah,
there was a a security researcher who discovered what he considered an exploit in Zoom, and contacted Zoom and said, "Hey, this be broke. You need to fix it." About 3 months ago. So it's 90 day, I think, for the disclosure. I think is the standard.
I guess it depends on who's doing it, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole timeline. If you look around, it might even be linked in the article to this guy's blog and blah 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 blah. Anyway, so the deal was that there were two problems. One, if a web page presented a link to a Zoom meeting and you activated that link, Zoom would immediately launch and join you to that meeting. And your camera and your microphone would be on and you would immediately be broadcasting.
Right. Which
we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a second.
Which sounds nasty, but it's also not like you wouldn't know it's happening.
Well,
it's like
yeah,
the Zoom client would start. I would assume the Zoom client would start up.
It does, yes.
The light on your camera would come on, assuming your camera has a light.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's not like some weird.
Right.
It's simply that you've been like unexpectedly joined to a meeting, and your camera. If you have your client configured to do so, your camera would turn on automatically, and so would your mic.
So you don't have to click on a link for this to happen. And the guy that did this showed that if you create an image tag in an HTML document, and that image tag links to a Zoom meeting, when it goes to load the image, Zoom will start. So might as well talk about it now. This to me was very, very, very overblown.
Yeah.
Two reasons. One, the client starts in front of you.
Yeah.
Unless there's another exploit involved I'm not aware of, it doesn't start in the background, and there's pretty good indication that something has gone.
Yeah, that's the point I was just trying to make. You see the client start. There are indicators that all of a sudden your camera is on, and you could turn it off.
Second, he basically said in the release that, and you can do this in the settings for the meeting, you can tell the client to automatically show video and audio. And absolutely correct. If the client is set to allow video and audio.
Right.
So, for instance, my client, I turned off video and audio on purpose because I saw them and said, that's stupid. I don't want that displaying unless I tell it to.
Right, but you had to go find that. You were in the settings, you found it, you turned it off.
Yeah, so I will concede that the defaults are that video and audio is on.
Yeah.
As honestly as I would expect for any video app, because that's sort of what it's for.
And your average user is going to be like, "Oh, well, yeah. If I'm joining a Zoom meeting, the whole point is to have my video and audio working. So why would I turn that off?"
My problem with the way that he wrote it was that the insinuation in his write-up was that the meeting was overriding that and forcing the client to show video and audio, and that's not true. That hasn't been true for the 4+ years that I've been using Zoom. Unless they changed something and I wasn't aware of it, ever since I've been using Zoom, I've been able to disable on the client side my audio and video from every single meeting. I couldn't override that.
I do believe that you can configure a Zoom meeting to not automatically turn on video and audio, or at least video.
You're correct. Yes, but
I don't think you can override it the other direction.
Correct. You cannot force it to override the client. So that was the first piece of it. The second piece of it, I will completely agree, was ridiculous. So Zoom built a small web server that ran locally on a Mac. And the purpose of this web server, as best I can tell, was that I think it was just Safari. There was some cores cross-origin request. I forget what CORS stands for. Security thing. Cross-origin request security, right? Is that what it is?
I don't know.
Anyway, there's a web security thing, CORS, which is hard to wrap your brain around to begin with, that would not allow certain requests if they were going to external websites.
Okay.
And this web server, apparently, because it was running on localhost, would override that because it was like a built-in in the web server, or in the web browser rather. And so what this thing did was it would sit there and run, and then when it got a request to open a Zoom meeting, it would just like launch Zoom, and off it would go.
Oh wow! So this was a way for Zoom to circumvent browser security.
Yes.
That's creepy.
So to be fair, Zoom is not the only one that has done this.
Yeah. No, I can imagine they're probably not.
Reports that I've seen, Zoom is not the only one that has done this. The unique, well, potentially, I haven't tested any of the other ones, but the quote unquote unique piece of this is that when you uninstalled Zoom, it didn't uninstall the browser, or the server rather.
Okay.
So that would continue running. So even after you uninstalled Zoom, for however long you had the machine, you had a little web server running inside that would receive Zoom commands. And apparently, actually not even apparently, I know this for a fact, if you received a Zoom invite and you clicked on the link and didn't have Zoom installed,
it would use that to reinstall it.
The server would automatically reinstall it for you.
Yeah, that was what I heard originally when I heard about this like local web server that was running. That's what it was for. Right. I didn't know about the cross-origin request security. Is that what it is?
Yeah,
CORS?
I think I don't know. Now I gotta look it up.
What does CORS stand for? You're gonna find like 3 other things that are completely
cross-origin request, cross-origin resource sharing.
Resource sharing. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we were close. We got
so,
the cross-origin part. It's 50%.
Is this basically like code that's supposed to help protect against cross-site scripting?
The core standard describes new HTTP headers which provide browsers a way to request remote URLs only when they have permission. So basically,
yes.
I think you can, as a web server, say, I'm serving you this content. Oh, by the way, you're going to be allowed to get content from these other sources.
Yeah.
No one else.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, it's sort of a cross-site CSRF prevention.
Right. So then, you have like that whole scandal from a while ago where advertisers were serving malicious ads that would pull in remote malicious code. So this sounds like it'd be meant to try to help protect against that. Yeah,
basically.
Neat.
Yeah,
and Zoom is circumventing it.
Causes immense headaches when you're trying to troubleshoot things and you can't figure out how to get around CORS. Anyway,
it's because you're not supposed to. Well, that's because what you have to do is start your own web server on localhost.
No. I think what you need to do is, as long as you're running a third-party advertising agency, the CORS stuff just doesn't apply. Is that how it works? Anyway,
I don't know if you're watching the chat, but we got a comment from Clayball.
Oh, he did the CORS presentation at DC 610 this month.
So he's at home like, these guys are idiots. They didn't listen to my talk.
Yeah, well, I didn't. Sorry.
You weren't there. I was, but I was busy helping Danny figure out how to stream stuff.
All right, I'm going to the chat to see how stupid I am.
Well, no, he just said CORS relaxes same origin policy new in HTML5.
Yes, yeah. I mean, yeah, that. Okay.
That,
We kind of got it right.
Yeah, totally.
Anyway, so what was I talking about? The web server. Okay,
yeah.
So, all right. So, long story short, Zoom apparently released, or not allegedly, Zoom released an update last night. Whatever day it was, last night or the night before, that fixed all this.
Oh, good.
Uninstall the web server. Everything's great and wonderful.
So how do they get around CORS now?
They don't. So now Now we'll talk about the actual article that I put into the.
Oh, okay. So all of that,
yeah.
all of that, and we haven't. We're like an hour into the news at this point, by the way.
I know. So in addition, I just found out about this today, and it's I'm kind of bothered by this. Actually, in addition to Zoom having fixed this and released an update for this, Apple also fixed this problem and issued an automatic update to macOS that just removed the server. Done. And
wait, so
article,
Apple pushed an automatic update?
Yes.
Like an update that I didn't even have to approve, or it would have come in like a normal update?
Apple has issued a silent automatic update to macOS.
Wait a second.
Yeah, well,
that isn't cool.
Well,
like they're using their power for good, but that's not cool.
Right. So this reminds me of. Do you remember? Hopefully, you remember this one. So when the Kindle first came out.
1984.
Freaking out. Yeah, people were freaking out about how you could just automatically remove books.
Yeah.
And the first book they removed was 1984, which was just like,
I swear that had to be a troll.
Oh yeah.
that was not accidental.
It had a plan. So Apple has, and now, according to the article, Zoom worked with Apple to do this and said like, hey, they work together, and I guess there's 4 million users of Zoom.
But
so
Zoom is the company who put the web server there. Why couldn't they remove it?
Because their client.
Oh, their client was already gone.
No, their client doesn't auto update. Well, there's that. Plus, their client doesn't auto update.
Okay, which is kind of silly.
I don't disagree. They have a really weird update strategy. So some updates they alert you of, like this one. An alert actually popped up in my Zoom client that said you need to update. I was looking for it, but it popped up.
Yeah.
In other instances, there have been Zoom updates that are, bug fixes or new features or whatever, and they don't bother popping up a thing that says, hey, there's an update. So they have a really weird update strategy. But anyway, Apple pushed an update silently, globally, that removed this. And I'm kind of bothered by that. Now,
yeah,
too.
Just a little bit.
Microsoft has been known to do this as
well.
Well,
they're Microsoft. You expect them to do it.
What? It's the thing. Like, this
I wouldn't. I just wouldn't expect that from Apple. That's all.
I don't know. And this is where you get into the. This is where I said earlier. Well, when we were talking before the show, like this kind of relates to the whole antitrust thing. Like,
I guess so.
that's a little weird. So that's the whole story in a nutshell. It's a very long story to get to a very short ending, but Apple did a thing, and it's creepy.
Apple did a thing that is questionable, but for a good reason.
Yeah. And now it's time to press the button.
It is time to press the button. That may be a record for our longest news section.
I don't think so, actually.
That was quite a long news section.
Well,
it's a good thing we don't have anything complicated to talk about in the main section.
No. Well, how complicated could it be? It's been around for how many years?
Yeah, right. All right. So I did I look? I can't remember now. Did I look for reviews? I don't think I did. I don't think we have any new reviews. Did your cool little review service tell us we have any reviews?
No, it's kind of boring. Either it sucks or we don't get reviews. One of the two.
I don't think anybody reviews our show.
I believe that it sucks.
Folks, go review our show so we know what we're doing right and wrong. I guess if you're quiet, we'll just assume we're doing everything right and we're awesome, and we'll just keep going on doing awesome. Right?
Yes, awesome. Awesome is the thing we do.
Awesome. Okay.
Announcements.
Oh yeah, I skipped over that, didn't I? We have announcements.
So there's two of them, real quick. The final DerbyCon finish line is September 4th to the 8th, assuming that you're going to training. They announced the bands. Have you seen the announcement for the bands?
I saw the announcement for the main act Saturday, which will again be Infected Mushroom.
Yes.
That is awesome. I've been begging.
Entire band.
Oh, was it? It wasn't the entire band last time. That's right.
Apparently not.
So that should be awesome. That'll be great. I've been kind of itching to see Infected Mushroom again, and I was hoping Dave would bring them back. Even though the only time he's repeated an act, at least a main act, was with the Crystal Method because a number of us missed it the first time. But Infected was so much of a better show. I'm so glad they're coming back.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. And the other act is Friday night is going to be Sublime.
That's right, I did see that. I've never seen Sublime. I was never really a huge Sublime fan, but I will definitely go see that show.
You know, so I skipped the what is it? Vanilla Ice. I skipped the Vanilla Ice show.
You shouldn't have. It was fun.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
It was fun.
So I'm definitely going to check out Sublime.
It was fun.
Infected is really what I'm after, though.
Oh, absolutely.
Of course, like the con as a whole, like I'm kind of stoked to see everybody, and kind of it's going to be a wonderful time and kind of sad at the same time.
Yeah, it's a little bittersweet. I'm sure it'll be a good time. I hope our friend, who I'm not going to say on the air, but you know who I'm talking about, who said he's probably not going to make it this year. Hope he finds a way to make it, just because I think he would be remiss to miss out on the last DerbyCon. You look confused as to who I'm talking about.
Are we talking about
our friend who works for a certain power company?
Oh,
that friend.
Yes. I'm cooking up a scheme to get him there.
Oh, so, good.
I may throw myself at the mercy of the better half. We'll see.
That's the way to do it. I would miss our long conversations in on the road trip to Louisville, political as they usually turn. If he didn't make it this year.
Yeah, well, we're gonna have my young one with us this year. So
yeah, I don't know.
Interesting. What? Don't look too excited. Damn.
No. What I mean is, I don't think he'll be an adequate replacement conversationally for what I'm thinking.
You might
of.
Actually be surprised.
Slightly
different topics, but you might be surprised.
Yeah. Okay. Different topics might be okay. I don't think I would like to converse with him on politics, is what I'm getting at.
Oh no!
I don't think he'll be nearly as open-minded as the person I'm referring to, or at least as agreeable to disagreement. How's that?
That works. So yeah. We'll see if we can get him there. So the other announcement is BSides. We had a powwow last night, finally, and we've shook a couple things loose. The BSides Delaware this year will be somewhere. It'll be after Labor Day, I guess. I think was the note that I was given, which is also the same time as DerbyCon. So
after Labor Day, that's vague.
So likely end of September, early October, I think is the target right now.
Okay.
They're just getting to the point where they can sign the agreement.
Can't you guys pick a set of dates and stick to them? Of course, DerbyCon's not anymore either. They used to be the end of September every year, and then they went to October. Now they're at the beginning of September.
Yeah, well, so DerbyCon's was the end of September, as long as they were at the Hyatt.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment they moved to the Marriott,
just exploded all that.
And it sort of went out of whack.
Yeah.
We have had the same problem. So we were pretty consistent right until we changed venues, and then, the last year at our previous venue was an issue because of they were doing.
Construction or something. Yeah.
And then this new venue, it's a little bit different. So we're hoping to get back to the end of September, early October time frame. And I think we're going to be able to do it. So as soon as I have dates, I'll let everybody know. And I've already gotten a couple of requests for CFPs that people want to submit already. So
I'll have to see if I can think up another topic to talk about at BSides Delaware.
This is our 10-year. So
oh, cool.
Whatever term is for that.
I submitted my so you want to start a podcast talk to DerbyCON. I don't know if that's going to get accepted or not. It's not quite the usual fodder for DerbyCon.
Might be a stable talk, but
it's kind of related though, right? I mean, sharing information is really like the point of a podcast, right? So that's why I thought it might fit. I figured, what the hell? It's the last year. I might as well try.
I was told that the confirmations are supposed to go out this week, but I actually haven't seen anybody say that they've been accepted or not yet.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're running behind. So
they always do.
My youngest spawn submitted 2 talks to DerbyCon.
Really?
For confirmation as well.
He's higher than me. I mean, I feel like the days where unknowns can get accepted to DerbyCon, talks at DerbyCon, is past.
I hope not. I mean,
it'd be awesome.
Year, so it doesn't matter, but I hope not.
It'd be awesome if he could get a talk accepted. That would be a great thing. I have spoken at DerbyCon, so have you. So It's not like I need a feather in my cap. I just thought it would be a fun thing to share. That's all. I already have a ticket because of Hack Your Derby, or at least I will. I've been assured that it's going to get accepted. Not that I thought it wouldn't. So that'll be there.
Yeah, and I've got mine through. I'm a volunteer, so I run part of the operations. So we'll both be there. For those that care, maybe we'll send out a tweet and have a little meetup.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody listening is going to be at DerbyCon, already has a ticket, let us know. It'd be cool to meet up with some listeners. That is, listeners you don't already see frequently anyway.
We can meet those too, I guess.
I don't know.
Like a bigger crowd, and we're more popular.
Sure. Sounds good. I'll say that I saw Jerry Bell like 400 times last year, like just passing in the hallways and stuff. It was kind of fun.
Yeah. I'm kind of. I wonder if. Probably not. I guess I'm gonna bet that Lurg is not gonna be there.
Yeah. Well, he has some health issues, right?
Yeah. That's why I think he's not gonna be there.
Yeah.
I kind of wish he was, so we could just wish him well. But
yeah, I don't really know the details, but we don't necessarily need to discuss them on the show, but we can talk about it later.
Yeah, it's all on Twitter if you want to see it.
Okay.
I mean, well wishes to him. I'm glad he's still around.
Yeah.
Probably the best way I can put it.
Absolutely. I've missed Defensive Security. They haven't been releasing shows, probably because he's not well.
Right.
Jerry tried one on his own. It was still a good show, but it wasn't quite the same without.
Well, they had one
Andy.
Last week or the week before that was him and Lark got together and sort of did a, hey, this is where we've been.
Okay. That may be queued up in my my podcast app, and I didn't see it yet.
Yeah, I'm 24 hours deep in mine, so I feel your pain.
So anyway, I guess that covers announcements, huh?
Yep. Push the button.
Push the button. No more chat. Yeah, I guess that's fine. We've chatted enough, right? Here we go.
Yes. Push the button.
Oddly enough, nobody responded to my sticker challenge from last show. You remember what the challenge was?
Sticker challenge.
You just said the phrase.
No.
Remember I said push the button, Frank?
Push the button. Oh.
Right.
Okay.
And I said if anybody could identify what that was from and let us know, I would send them a sticker. Well, nobody responded, so I guess no one gets a sticker.
Maybe. I mean, we have those people in the chat. Maybe one of them knows.
Yeah, maybe. Does anyone in the chat know what push the button, Frank, is from? No Googling. Because Googling's cheating.
Is it though? Or is it, using my
Is it
cache?
It's resourcefulness.
No, it's using my cache.
Using your cache. Okay, your cache is the...
I had a cache miss and I have to request it from Google.
Your cache is the wealth of all humanity's knowledge on the internet? That's your cache.
Yeah. Why wouldn't it be?
Anyway, The main topic tonight is DNS. I don't know. So last time around, we talked about SSH and hardening SSH, and I sort of have this idea that maybe we'll cover some other services in a similar way. That's not necessarily what we're talking about tonight, although it could be. But we're just kind of going back to basics on what DNS is, why it's important, how it works, things like that. So I don't know, Jason, you may actually be an even deeper wealth of knowledge on this protocol and this service than I am, because I know you've done a lot more work in making it operate from the network side than I have. So I will say, at its base, DNS is the domain name system, domain name service. I don't know, does that stand for system or service? Service, the domain name service. And it is the way in which your browser, your computer, your whatever, resolves names to IP addresses. Anyone listening to the show that doesn't know that, now you know. I don't know if that's really that.
Vice versa.
Huh? Vice versa. Oh, and
vice versa.
Right. Resolves.
Although that's, if you look at it, that's kind of a workaround, sort of.
Okay. Well, you can talk more about that at some point. Yeah. So basically, it's the thing that makes everything on the internet human readable. Not everything, but every address on the internet human readable. It's what turns youtube.com into an IP address, because that's how your computer actually connects to it. Again, this is a podcast for sysadmins, and if you don't know that, we're being a little too high level here, I suppose. But if you didn't know it, hey, we're happy to talk about it. So I don't know, Jason, you want to take it from here? I don't know what you had as an idea for where you wanted to go with this.
Yeah. So DNS is, so back in the day, we go back to ARPANET days, and I'm going to get my history wrong because I don't remember exactly the order of things. But basically, the machines needed addresses. So you had the MAC addresses of Ethernet cards, although back then it wasn't. Again, I don't necessarily remember exactly what was what, but there was an address of some sort. And eventually, we came up with this whole idea of IP addresses. And IP addresses are simple enough when there's, a dozen of them or 24 of them. But at some point, you can't remember all those numbers. Most people can't remember all those numbers.
Yeah, so we've all run a small network at home or whatever, where it's like, I can remember that my printer's address is 10.1.7.48. That's easy enough. I don't need DNS for that. But when you've got a whole huge network of machines, it's easier to remember my printer's name is DeskJet than my printer's name is, what was the IP again?
Right. So I was able to at various different places I worked remember, upwards of probably 100 or more IPs and what they did based on. But we had very strict hierarchies of where things were and where the common things were and what IPs meant what, that sort of thing. Like .1 was the gateway, and so that was the router, and .2 was the switch. So there were sort of cheating shortcuts to know what was what. But when you scale that up and you start have, say an internet, and there's millions of items on there, it becomes hard to remember what the addresses of things are. And addresses aren't necessarily meaningful. So if I tell you that you can go right now to 24.229.52.185, I think it is, and you're going to see a thing. But that's not going to mean anything to you. But if I tell you that you can go to blog.godshell.com, that's a lot more meaningful.
Right.
Those words mean something. And DNS is a mechanism to take words in a hierarchy, so those dots are actually representative of a hierarchy, and turn that into an address that can then be used to tunnel through the internet or route through the internet and get to a destination. So at its heart, DNS is a way to sort of personalize those very uninteresting strings of numbers and turn it into something that you can remember. If that makes sense.
Doesn't make sense at all. No, it makes total sense. Yeah, and then this gets even more important when you're talking about IP schemes outside of IPv4, like IPv6, where an address is, 64 characters? Or 128?
128 bits.
Yeah, 128 bits. And they're not just decimal, right? They're hex.
No periods. It's all hex and it's colons. So it's, I don't know, 12:78:8 E colon, 3F colon, whatever.
Yeah.
And it goes on and on and on and on. These are huge strings of hexadecimal digits.
And then even beyond that, DNS is a great way to mask things like load balancers, ranges of IPs that are serving the same service. It's very simple when you're saying blog.godshell.com resolves to one IP address, and if somebody can memorize that IP address, they'll likely get to that same site every time. But when you've got like a highly available system, or when you've got a system that's in 2 or 3 different clouds, and maybe it changes from time to time, or maybe you're just changing providers or whatever, or you've got some sort of elastic system, that IP address that it resolves to could change at any moment.
Yeah, so we've developed a lot of cool magic tricks over the years on how to use things like DNS. For instance, typically you think of DNS as a one-to-one. So I say, example.com, and at the other end you get 10.1.2.3. But I could also say example.com and you get multiple IP addresses.
Right.
And the idea that it round robins through them. I could also say example.com and you get a return of what's called a CNAME record, which is it's a canonical name record, which is if you think in a programming language, it's a pointer. Mm-hmm. So example.com points at other example.com. So you end up and then you have to do another lookup to say, well, what is other example.com?
Right.
And then an address for that. And,
right.
And that can go,
So www.ironsysadmin.com could be a CNAME for ironsysadmin.com because they both go to the same place because they're both the same site.
Right. And CNAMEs are interesting because it actually slows things down. So it's convenient because now you have, if you ever update the IP address of the thing that is at the root of the CNAME, it automatically updates the CNAME.
Right.
However, every time you look up a CNAME, you also have to look up what it points at.
Yeah.
And if that's a CNAME, you have to look up what that points at. And
yeah, and they're all separate queries. If it's just 2 levels deep, you don't really notice it. But when it's 3 or 4 levels deep, you might have a problem. Maybe not a problem, but you have a delay.
Yep. So you've got names pointing at names. You've got names pointing at multiple addresses. You have special records such as MX. MX is a mail exchanger record. The purpose behind this is that if you have let's take example.com again. If you have example.com and you have a record in there pointing at the website 1.2.3.4, and you want to receive mail at user@example.com, 1.2.3.4, which is your web server, hopefully isn't your mail server as well.
Right. Now there was a day when it was expected that it would be.
Yes.
Way back when.
But then they realized with scale and security and everything else that it didn't need to be. The MX record, what that does is points at what is the mail server.
Yeah. So it used to be if I were trying to send an email to jason@example.com and there was no MX record, it would just say, okay, example.com is at, whatever IP the website for example.com is, and it would try to send mail there. The MX record was added later, I believe it was added later, as a way of separating the two. So you could say, yeah, example.com's website is over there, but the mail is over there.
Yeah, I think this was added as part of an RFC.
Yeah.
But I'm not positive on that. At any rate, there's some trickery inside of the MX record as well. So there's this field called priority.
Mm-hmm.
You can identify multiple priorities with the lowest one being the first one chosen.
And I mean, priority can be set on most records. Like you could have www.example.com. You could have three records for that, and one with a lower priority, and it would act the same way as you're describing. That would be tried first, and then the lower or higher priorities would be tried other times. You look confused as though I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right.
Can you have a priority on an A record?
I believe so.
That one I'm not positive about. Anyway, MX records can have a priority.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that the top priority target for an MX record is always a name, and that name has to resolve. So you get, I want to send mail to example.com. Oh, the MX record points at mail.example.com. Okay, I need the address for mail.example.com. You get that address. You try to go to that address. If for some reason you can't send mail there, the mail server may say, okay, give me another address for mail.example or for example.com, and maybe you get mail 2, and then it'll look that up. So I mean, it goes through like this recursive test trying to find out which record to go to, and eventually you hopefully end up with one that receives that. So those are MX records. You also have there's some weird ones like serve records, SRV records, which are service records, and they're the idea behind those, my understanding of the idea behind those is that they are sort of so MX record was very specific to mail servers, and they realized that after MX records came out, they can't create a new record type for every single service that exists out there.
Right.
So if they came out with a generic serve record type,
yep,
cover all of them. So a service record identifies, I believe it identifies the port as well.
Yeah.
So you get there's a very specific list of information that's in there. So you get the service, the protocol, the name of the service, and in return you'll get the port of the service as well as the name, the DNS name of the service that you're trying to get to.
Yeah, and a common use for this is like auto discovery. So like Windows Active Directory domains have a lot of SRV records that help tell it where the domain controller is and where the LDAP server is, or whatever they call LDAP in the Active Directory world. Same thing with Kerberos. Same thing with FreeIPA or Red Hat's IDM. There's a lot of server records that make all that stuff work. A lot of black magic in the background, and like VoIP services. There's a ton of SRV records that go into, where is the where are the various services that make my VoIP system work.
Right. There are a ton of other resource record types. A records are the IPs. That's the DNS name to the IP.
And then Quad A for IPv4 or IPv6, right?
IPv6, yep. Quad A records are for IPv6. We talked about CNAME. We talked about MX. We talked about SRV. There's 2 records that are sort of related to the domain itself, as far as like sort of the housekeeping for the domain.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is the SOA record. It's the start of authority.
Yep.
And basically that sort of lays out, they call it authoritative information for the zone.
Like the TTL for the zone and the serial number.
The name of the primary name server.
Yep.
The email address of the administrator.
Yep.
The serial number of the zone. So every time you update a DNS record, that serial number has to change. It always has to increment.
Yeah, that's basically how other name servers realize there's been an update to that zone.
Right.
So if Ironsysadmin.com adds a new DNS record for, like, I don't know, slack.ironsysadmin.com, then the serial number gets updated so that other name servers, which I guess we can talk about how all this operates later, other name servers will know that there's been a new record added or a change to a record on that zone.
And then there's NS records, which are so for a given domain or zone. The NS records identify the authoritative name servers for that zone. So they're responsible for giving you an authoritative, like, I can tell you that this A record corresponds to this IP address. There's also there's text records. That's the other one that's fairly common. TXT records, which are exactly what you would think. You put in a DNS name of whatever, and you just get text as the return.
Yeah,
this is commonly used for things like crypto, things like verification, which also tends to be some sort of cryptographic
yeah,
blob of text that you're using.
Yeah, so I mean, like commonly, like, oh, I'm adding a domain to Google Apps or something. They'll say, okay, create this text record in your domain to prove that you own the domain, that sort of thing.
Right, and the value of that text record is some crazy UUID or something.
Yeah.
It's also used for anti-spam records such as SPF, spam, etc.
But it could also just be used because you want to make a note of something.
Yeah, I mean, text records you could put a text record in that says "Hello World."
I mean, like you could, if I mean, argue one way or the other whether this is a good practice or not. But you could say, like, you can add a text record to a host that says, like, this is my database server.
Yes.
Just so that you can look it up later. Obviously, then anyone on the internet can say, what's the text record for, serverx.xyz.com, and they'll say, this is my database server, and then they'll be like, oh, I can attack that and get database.
Right. So those are pretty much the common ones. There are apparently a lot more DNS records than I realized. Different resource types.
Oh, there's a million of them.
There's a couple of them for what's called DNSSEC, which we're not going to cover because neither of us know enough about it to speak about it, and I think it's stupid to begin with. Anyway, we're not going to cover that one. And there's a lot of DNS record types that are apparently expired as well. Like there used to be X25 records presumably for X25 addresses. There is a special workaround, if you will. So DNS is entirely designed around taking a alphanumeric string separated by periods denoting a hierarchy and turning it into an IP address. And at some point, I don't know if it was immediate or somewhere after they initially designed this, they realized that wouldn't it be great if we could give you an IP address and you could tell us what the DNS entry was for it, which is called a reverse record. So reverse records are also A records, and they are in a special domain called in-adder ARPA. I think it's Internet Address and then ARPA, presumably for ARPANET. So there's a special, like, we can probably provide documentation pretty easily on this, but when you look up an IP address, it automatically tags the end of it with .IP ARPA adder on the end of it, and then does a normal DNS lookup, and then you end up with whatever the result is. There's because you have four potential records that it could match, there's a hierarchy that it goes through to try to match each one of those individually, to find the correct zone to match them in, starting with the most specific, there's three that it goes through. Most specific, least specific, to figure it out.
Right. And those records are actually defined usually backwards.
Yeah.
Which is kind of confusing when you're first looking at, like, how do I do this stuff?
It does get confusing.
Yeah, you're like, wait, what? Huh?
Yeah, so in other words, to explain, if I was looking up 10.20.30.40, it might the first thing it's going to look up is it's going to look up the entry for 40 in the 30.20.10.inattr.arpa record.
Right.
Then it's going to look up 40.30 in the 20.10.inattr.arpa record.
Right.
And then finally to the last one.
Right. So you might have a zone that is 30.20.10.in.attr.arpa, and then inside of it you'll have records that look like 1, and then it has the host name for what would have been 10.20.30.1. 2 would be 10.20.30.2, right?
Yeah, these are pretty straightforward. You can have a maximum, excluding the name server, excluding anything other than A records. You can have a maximum of 255 addresses in there.
Right.
Because there's only 255 numbers.
Unless you define your zone as 20.10 instead of 30.20.10.
Right.
In which case, you would define records like 1.30, 2.30, 3.30, right?
Right.
This all gets confusing, and it's a lot easier if you have something to look at to compare. But yeah, we don't have that in front of us.
So that's sort of the kind of general aspect of it.
Yeah, so there's lots of like neat uses for DNS as well. Like mail systems use RBL blacklists, remote block lists, which are basically DNS zones that include a whole bunch of IP addresses. And are they text records or are they? I never really dug that deeply into them.
I don't remember. It's been a very long time since I've done that. I don't think so, though. I think it's an A record.
Right. So the way these block lists work is like an incoming SMTP connection occurs, and then your SMTP daemon has a shim in there that says, "Oh, I'm supposed to check it against this blacklist first." And then it does a DNS query against that blacklist, and if it returns, then says like, "Yup, that IP's in my blacklist," then it drops it. Right. So that's an interesting way to manage a blacklist. Right. So.
Yeah, I mean, DNS is pretty versatile. So you think of uses like that. You've got the uses of looking up domain names, turning them to IP addresses to be able to get to things, which happens, I would assume trillions or more times per day. And then there's interesting uses. So we have some viewers that are very familiar with this at the moment. You can. You can store data in text records, and this goes right into the wacky. So if you gain access to a, let's say you break into some server and you have a shell account, and you need to transfer data to that shell account, and that most likely things are being monitored. You could take an exploit of some sort, some binary file, convert it to base64 encoded text, stuff it in text records in DNS, and then do a series of DNS lookups on the server you just compromised and rebuild that binary out of DNS.
Yep, and then there's no actual file transfer, just a bunch of DNS lookups, which are usually allowed at the firewall level. And in the other direction, so I mean, it's worth describing a little bit at least about how DNS lookups work, right? So when I'm on my machine and I say, what's the DNS record for blog.godshell.com, my machine will be configured to look at a name server, which is generally just a caching server, right? That thing
stub server, actually. Typically,
you mean local?
Yeah, your local machine looks at so your router on your cable modem, DSL, whatever, is a stub server.
Right.
It doesn't usually cache anything. It's entirely there to push that request along to something else.
Right, which will go on to whatever its configured name servers are, which is kind of the same right? So there will be a DNS cache somewhere, usually your ISP or your employer or whatever. Whoever manages your network will probably run a cache name server. You can use Google's caching name servers. You can use other public caching name servers. And then all those things do is they interface with the network of DNS servers on the internet by saying, okay, I've been asked for blog.godshell.com. I will ask and correct me if I'm wrong in the way this goes, I will ask the DNS root servers who is authoritative DNS for for godshell.com. Or I guess it would go to .com first, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
It'd be like com and then godshell.com. And then it would say, okay, that guy named Jason, he's got a DNS server of his own where he puts all of his records.
Doesn't know my name.
Doesn't know your name. Well, it might from your who is record, which is a whole other thing we could talk about. It would then basically say, okay, caching name server, go talk to, dns1.godshell.com or whatever the hell you're calling your name server. And then that'll get the actual record. The caching name server, and this is where the cache comes in, will say, okay, what is the time to live on that record? Let's just say it's a day, because that's common. For 1 day, I will keep the record for blog.godshell.com in my own lookup table, and whenever someone asks me for blog.godshell.com, I will simply return it. I won't go ask again. I won't check the root servers. I won't check check dns.godshell.com. I'll just tell you the address that I got.
Purely as a shortcut for speed.
Right. After 24 hours, if you ask me for it again, I'll go through this whole procedure again, which is why TTL exists. I told you all that to say, if I want to exfiltrate data, what I can do is I'm the guy that controls dns.godshell.com in this example, or you're the guy that controls it. You can set up query logging on your name server, or you can just make a name server that doesn't actually return any queries. It just simply takes any requests that come in and logs them.
Yep.
I compromise a server, say it's a database server. I do this ridiculously huge select statement that gets me all the data, and I put it into a buffer, and then, 64 bytes or whatever at a time, I take the data and I put it into a DNS query for something.godshell.com. Right? And I just stuff all that data into there. And then the dns.godshell.com gets that request, and it says, okay, the first 64 characters of this request isn't really a request. It's the data I'm exfiltrating, and I put that into a file. Right? Yep. And then I just sequentially dump that all into a file, and presuming all of that data has made it through the queries, no smart system administrator noticed it and stopped it, you'll end up with all the data on the DNS server, or the server, right? This machine you've set up that's only there to receive all this data. So there's some crafty stuff you can get done as an attacker on a compromised machine simply using DNS queries. Because we've just outlined two different ways that you can do that, two different attack vectors here.
All because DNS is absolutely critical.
Yeah, so not only is DNS...
almost every operation.
Not only is DNS absolutely critical, it is, for the most part, trusted as innocuous.
Yep.
Right? Oh, it's just DNS queries. It's fine. Why is it looking up a 64-character string? It must be some cloud service that's using this weird key to blah-de-blah. Yep. Not realizing that data that's coming out is like base 64 encoded your database data. Or whatever, encrypted in some way.
Yep. So let's talk about a little bit of the issues with DNS. I mean, obviously, one of the issues is that everybody trusts it because, well, it's just DNS data. If you don't have that, things don't work. The process that you talked about for resolving, which is what you call when you look up a DNS address, the process for resolving an address of going to the stub resolver and then going to the caching resolver and then going through this whole process of asking the root and then that takes time. And what they found is that, or what attackers found or somebody found, is that if you can respond faster than that process finishes, the first response wins. This is called a DNS caching or DNS poisoning attack. So basically, I'm sitting on my server and I go, hey, what's the address for google.com? And my computer says, I don't know, I'll find out. Hang on. And it goes out and says, hey, what's the address for google.com? If I, as an attacker, know that you're going to look that up eventually, I can be basically flooding you with responses. Hey, the answer is my bad address. The answer is my bad address. And if the moment that you ask that, I'm able to get a response in before the official response comes in, first response wins. So now,
Because why wouldn't it?
right, now your machine says, oh, google.com is bad address over there. Okay, cool. Let's go there. And that is a poisoning attack.
So I don't want to go too far down the DNSSEC rabbit hole, but isn't this what DNSSEC is supposed to prevent?
No.
No?
No. To my knowledge, no, not necessarily. There's a not necessarily in there. So a stub resolver is not smart enough to know what DNSSEC is and believes everything it's being told. So a stub resolver automatically just says, oh, that's the address? Cool, we're good, and moves on.
So what if, instead of using a stub resolver, I'm talking directly to a full-blown DNS cache?
So if you have a caching resolver that is DNSSEC aware, and this is where my knowledge is going to get a little shaky, my understanding is that the way that DNSSEC works is that it starts at the root. The root has an entry that says that the .com is signed, and .com has an entry that says that godshell.com is signed, and godshell.com says an entry that says that blog.godshell.com is signed. And DNS poisoning doesn't work in that respect, because if you try to insert a blog.godshell.com response and your cache knows that com is signed, it doesn't match. Like, hey, this should be signed and it's not, and something's wrong. I think there's attacks. My understanding is there's attacks around that where you can still inject things if you're fast enough and be able to take that over. And this is sort of the problem that I have with DNSSEC is you're protecting the records. You're protecting the integrity of the records. So nobody can ever accuse you of having put in the wrong record in your DNS server. Completely agree. But because the communication channel between you and every other DNS server in the world is completely unencrypted, you can never guarantee that the person responding to you is authoritative. So basically, like, authoritative is like, hey, I'm authoritative. Cool. All right, I believe you. So it solves part of the problem, but not all of it. I think, I'm of the opinion that transport security trumps the security of the records themselves. I think if we had transport security in place, we'd be in a much better place today. Because we went the other way and said record security first and transport security second, I think that that's an issue. I mean, the other problem with all of this is that, at the end of the day, my local router in my house is never going to support transport security because it's just too expensive.
Yeah.
That thing needs to encrypt. Forget that. Something else needs to do that.
I mean, as CPUs get faster and cheaper, I mean, we already see this, today with some of the protocols that were designed so many years ago that were designed for efficiency. The efficiency isn't as necessary anymore because the CPUs that are crunching on that are sufficiently advanced, right?
Right. I don't disagree, but I think that those CPUs that can do transport security on DNS exist today. I not even think, I know I could build, if it was ubiquitous, I could build a router today that every single packet, without any application involved at all, every single packet that went over the wire was encrypted with no loss in speed and latency at all. The chips exist already. but they don't make it into consumer goods because nobody cares. Nobody really looks at that.
Yeah.
No universal standard for it. So if I built an encrypted router today, I couldn't talk to anything. I mean, that's the other problem, is that there's, the fallback piece is kind of an issue. But the stub resolver not having any sort of encryption is a major problem. And I think that's the attack vector. I mean, if I wanted, and we saw that with back in February, March, I think, when there was a big to do with a bunch of domains that got attacked. Some of them were attacked where the credentials on the domain were hijacked and they ended up adding or changing records. And of course, the domain provider is the one that signed the domain. So the DNS sec records were perfect because it just signed them. And in that attack, if I remember correctly, some of the people that were attacked, it was basically their stub resolvers that were sort of taken over. And anything that goes in there is going to be believed because there's no intelligence there, or no reasonable intelligence to identify a fraud. So that, I mean, there's a huge weakness in DNS, and there's been sort of a, I don't know how big the movement is, but I know that at least some of the people that I follow that I've seen in the DNS arena have talked about getting rid of DNS entirely, because it doesn't, at this point in time, like, what's your DNS today? If you want to go find, let's say you need a new strut for your Jeep, how do you find that website?
I mean, I guess that would depend. Like, if I'm thinking far enough into where I think you're going with this, I guess the first thing the average person would do is go to a Google search.
Okay, so why does DNS matter?
Well, DNS would matter if you're like, oh, well, I'm going to go to the website of my favorite auto parts dealer and just type that into the URL bar.
Right, which also works in search for the most part. If I go to search and I type, famous auto parts dealer, it's going to pop up.
But so for the...
I'm not saying there's not problems with it.
Yeah, for the end user, that works fine.
Yes.
For the average person who's just browsing the internet, yeah, that's great. But it's not fine for, mail server needs to find the MX record of the destination server.
Right.
It doesn't work.
There's definitely issues with it.
It's an interesting start, and I know isn't Firefox deploying some sort of a DNS over HTTPS protocol in an upcoming browser?
That I find interesting, because the DNS over HTTPS covers the transport security, which I think to me, that is the biggest target.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pushback on that. I admit I haven't dug deep into why, but there's a debate on whether DNS over HTTPS is good or bad. The one or two DNSSEC purists that I've talked to hate it with a passion, but purists usually end up hating things with a passion anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and you're always going to find that. You're also going to find people that just don't like change. DNS has worked fine for 40 years. Get your hands out of my DNS.
Right. So I mean, there's still things to be done, and it's still evolving, and I think it'll evolve for, as long as the internet exists. But it's definitely a backbone. If DNS goes away, that's pretty much the end of the world for most applications.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point is, and this is a much broader point than just DNS, there are protocols in use today on the internet that were designed when the internet was still a new thing.
IPv4.
And I mean, awesome that they have scaled and they have proven to be stable protocols for so long. The problem is, each and every one of them has flaws, like the things we've just outlined with DNS. DNS is a very old protocol.
Everything has flaws.
And there are certain there are certain flaws that are hard to fix without a full-on re-implementation. We see this with mail, right? I mean, I spent the past 10 years of my career, longer than that, running mail servers. And there are flaws in the SMTP protocol that make it really easy for spammers to circumvent things, to pretend they are someone they're not, to send mail looking like it came from someone else, to phish people. And there have been all these little things bolted on to try to help stop these things. But the bottom line is there's a core problem with the protocol. And it's impossible to fix without a complete re-implementation. Now, as we're shifting to things like cloud providers for mail, right? So the self-hosted mail situation is slowly dwindling. It could be 20 years before the last fully self-hosted mail server goes away. But once the Gmails and the Microsofts and the AWSs are controlling all of the flow of mail, they can start making core changes to the way the protocol works to help mitigate that stuff, right? And then the people like Jason who are still running their own mail will have to either keep up or they won't be able to run their mail anymore. And people will complain, but the point will be enough of the email infrastructure no longer depends on administrators like me and Jason that the Gmails and the Amazons and the whoever's of the world can simply make changes to the protocol so that it works in a more secure way. Or maybe we just stop using mail. I don't know if that's going to happen soon, but there are so many other ways that we communicate. I know a lot of communication is moving away from email and into things like Slack, or into things like social, or into things like SMS, which is not a step forward, but it's there. But my point is, the protocol may simply die out. DNS is not a thing that's going to die out unless we take efforts to replace it with something better.
Right. So, and if anything, DNS is almost becoming more important. So, you know, we've talked before about containers and DevOps and how things are working. So the networks of today are incredibly dynamic. At any given time in, you know, any network that is at all even close to current standards, I'd be hard pressed to tell you what the IP address of any specific service is. All of that dynamically changes using DNS.
Yeah. Because
go ahead.
Because all of that is now containerized or in a cloud service, or, I mean, half the time, especially if you're talking about a cloud provider, you might not even know what address your service is running on. You know the publicly accessible address, but that's probably a load balancer or some sort of proxy.
In a lot of cases, that stuff is starting to change a little bit too. I mean, that has to stay somewhat static because you need to get to it. But
yeah,
those records do dynamically change as well. Because at the end of the day, like if you're dealing with containers, like who cares what the address is? I just need to know how to get to the container that's running.
Yeah.
You have services like Consul. So Consul, CONSUL, is a service discovery system. And when a container comes online, it registers with Consul and says, hey, I'm here. Here's my address. Here's my information. This is what I do. And anybody looking for me is going to look for this thing. So if you're a Consul aware application and you're looking for the caching server, you're going to go to Consul and say like, hey, I need a caching server and it has to meet this criteria. And Consul says, oh yeah, this is the address. Here you go. And that is it may not necessarily be a direct DNS replacement per se, but is a form of DNS. In a lot of cases, Consul is used as a DNS server because you can query it with the DNS protocol and get answers based on what you're looking for. But in other instances, it has morphed it into another sort of, I mean, it's more proprietary, I think, because it's just that one application, but it has morphed it into an alternative DNS where you say, hey, I want to get to this cache, like, where is it? And it just says, like, it's over here. Here's the address. And it's not using the RFC approved DNS protocol. It's using some, something that they built internally.
Right, which is still essentially a name resolution service, but it's not.
Right.
It's not DNS as we know it.
Right. Zookeeper is another example of this, and there's more. There's a lot of these out there. And as we move to a much more dynamic type environment where things are changing constantly, you're going to see this a lot more. I want to get to Amazon. I don't, at the end of the day, I couldn't care less what the address is. Just tell me how to get there.
Exactly.
And whatever mechanism I need to get there is great. So we may see DNS move away entirely inside the larger networks and only be used for the outside world. It's hard to say what things are going to look like, 5 years from now. Hell, it's hard to say what things are going to look like next year.
Yep. Things are changing pretty quickly.
Yep.
All right, well, I think that about covers it. We've gone on about DNS for about an hour at this point. They're making this a nice, 2-hour show.
Well, it's not normal because why?
Yeah, right, exactly. We usually go long. And my Jeep doesn't use struts, by the way.
Your DNS doesn't use
I said my Jeep doesn't use struts. That was the example you used before.
Yeah. Okay, well. Jeeps. They're these things with 4 wheels that drive places and can climb rocks.
Yep.
So, if you have questions about DNS, send them in.
Obviously, we have quite a bit of information, unless it's about DNSSEC.
If you have DNSSEC questions, send them in. I know people.
There we go. We can get you to the right people.
And I'll do even one better. I will give you the official answer from people who know about DNSSEC, and I will give you the snarky answer from me.
That's what people come to Ironsysadmin for. The snarky, pessimistic Jason answer.
I try.
All right, folks. Well, thanks for bearing with us on this long show tonight. We've had a good time giving it to you, and we hope you people have enjoyed hearing it. If you want to catch us live, if you're not watching us live tonight and you're listening to this audio after the fact, or even watching the video after the fact, we're now recording on Thursdays instead of Wednesdays. We've had a few conflicts, partially because Jason took a new job that takes away his Wednesday evenings, which is fine. So we're doing Thursdays. We're doing the second and fourth Thursday of the month now, which I'm going to have to update in the show notes. I see it still says Wednesday. I'm going to change that right now so that when I publish this, it'll say Thursday. Right, so same time as usual, around 7 p.m. Eastern. But yes, Thursday now instead of Wednesday. Second and fourth Thursday of every month. You can find us on YouTube, youtube.com/Ironsysadmin Podcast. You can also join our Slack workspace if you are interested in chatting with us or with any of our other listeners. It's been a great place to get feedback from folks and get some information, even from the folks at the Admin Podcast.
Hi, guys.
I believe 2 of them are members of our Slack, which is pretty cool. It means we get to collaborate a little bit with our friends from across the pond. So that's fun. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter. Just look for Ironsysadmin. I think we're the only people using that name. Who else would want it, right? And you can subscribe to us wherever you normally find podcasts. I know for certain we're on Google Play and Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. And, I have found us in lots of places where I didn't know we existed, but we're there anyway. And last but not least, if you would like to support this show monetarily, you can do so via Patreon. Patreon.com/Ironsysadmin. And with that, I think we're going to call it a night. I have been your host tonight, along with Jason. You can find me on Twitter at Gangriff. Jason, I know you probably won't spell it, but go ahead, give them your Twitter handle.
Look, my Twitter handle shows up on the stream these days, I guess.
Not anymore. It just says X to the P.
It did previously, and if you missed it, that's your problem.
Ah.
So I'm on Twitter at Xenophage. I have a blog at blog.gotshell.com. You can come and make fun of my latest blog entry, which is wrong, and I have to correct.
That's always fun. At least you can admit when you're wrong.
Hey,
I
did a thing and it was wrong. So
I have a couple of interesting posts that are going to be going up on Red Hat's Enable Sysadmin, aggregation. redhat.com/sysadmin, I think, is the URL where you can find these things. I'll tweet about them once they're published. I'm about to write an interesting article about geeking outside of the office, which basically is going to correlate hobbies outside of technology with how they keep you sane as a sysadmin, which is a topic we've talked about here in the past.
How do you know it's interesting if you haven't written it yet?
Because it's gonna be interesting because I write awesome stuff. Right? You're supposed to go, yeah, your stuff is great.
Yes. I'm sorry. There must have been some latency there.
That's what it is. You can blame...
Awesome.
Zoom was too busy installing remote access Trojans in your Apple machine, and that it's slowed down your response, right?
Yeah, but it popped up a notice that it was installing a remote access Trojan while it was doing it.
And then the webcam came on, and all of a sudden...
I was able to accept that process,
Nice. So anyway, folks, we're going to call it a night. Thank you for watching and or listening, and we will catch you again in 2 weeks. See you then.
Night all.